Welcome to this explainer. I am so incredibly excited to unpack today's topic with you because we are looking at something that is way bigger than just a game of soccer. We're talking about the upcoming North American World Cup. It's uniquely intertwined with high-stakes regional politics, intense geopolitical tensions, and honestly some of the most polarizing personalities on the planet. It's this wild collision of sports and global power dynamics. And why does this matter to you? Well, because all of this off-field noise actually threatens to directly impact the purity of the sport you're tuning in to watch. We're going to break it all down step by step to understand exactly what is happening behind the scenes.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap and see what we've got. First, we'll look at the biggest tournament ever. Second, we'll get into the tri-nation hosting tensions. Third, we'll unpack Trump and Infantino's alliance. And finally, we'll ask the big question: will politics eclipse the pitch?
So moving right along to Section 1, the biggest tournament ever, expanding the beautiful game. 104 matches. Just think about that for a second. That number is absolutely staggering. By expanding the field to 48 teams competing over 39 days, FIFA has objectively created the biggest World Cup ever held, literally the biggest in the history of the sport. To actually win the whole thing, a team now has to survive 8 matches instead of the traditional 7. It is a monumental, sprawling undertaking that requires just a vast amount of infrastructure.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how that massive undertaking is being divided up. Out of the total, a whopping 78 matches are taking place in the United States, while co-hosts Canada and Mexico are getting just 13 matches each. This incredibly unequal split is exactly why the US, and by extension figures like Donald Trump, are absolutely dominating the conversation, while the co-hosts are kind of finding themselves sidelined in the global buildup.
Now, for the United States, this is a huge return to a monumental global sporting stage. You might actually remember their big introduction to hosting the World Cup back in 1994. It literally kicked off with Diana Ross famously missing a penalty kick during this incredibly lavish opening ceremony. But hey, despite that somewhat rocky start, the whole thing was a massive success. It hooked American fans, it helped launch Major League Soccer, and it proved the US could host a massive global soccer event, really laying the groundwork for this monumental 2026 return.
But we absolutely have to balance that history by looking south to Mexico, right? A nation with an incredible, undeniable pedigree in the sport. This is going to be a historic 4th time hosting a senior World Cup tournament for Mexico. They have the newly updated, utterly iconic Aztec Stadium in Mexico City. If you were to put together a highlight reel of the greatest World Cup moments ever, several of them happened right in that building. We're talking Diego Maradona's infamous Hand of God in 1986 and legendary World Cup victories by both Pelé and Maradona. The history there is just unmatched.
All right, on to Section 2, tri-nation hosting tensions, the political reality of North America.
So when the US, Mexico, and Canada first pitched this whole idea, they released this massive doorstopper of a bid document. And their official slogan: unity, certainty, opportunity. They promised this perfectly unified front and ready-made infrastructure, existing stadiums, countless hotels, enormous airports. It was a pitch so strong and so prepackaged that it easily beat out the competing bid from Morocco. They were basically selling the absolute dream of a perfectly harmonious North American continent. But let's step back and look at the real-world friction happening right now. Since that bid, we've seen some pretty significant diplomatic turbulence, particularly with Donald Trump's return to the presidency. We're talking about U.S. tariffs directly targeting their biggest trading partners, Mexico and Canada. We've seen heavy diplomatic friction, including Trump referring to the Canadian Prime Minister as a governor and even suggesting Canada become the 51st U.S. state. Plus, we've seen retaliatory liquor tariffs from Canada and intense border crackdowns and immigration raids involving Mexico. These real-world tensions are causing leaders like Canada's Mark Carney to openly suggest looking for relationships outside the U.S.
Now, if you watched the tournament draw in Washington just a few months ago, you saw all the leaders, Donald Trump, Mark Carney, Mexico's Claudia Sheinbaum, standing together on stage smiling like the absolute greatest of friends. It's your classic political photo op, right? But online and in the media, Canada and Mexico are incredibly overshadowed. The political noise just heavily favors the United States, leaving the co-hosts a bit lost in the shuffle of American dominance.
Which brings us to Section 3, Trump and Infantino's alliance, protocol and power.
This relationship is just fascinating. Take a look at the FIFA Peace Prize. This was a completely custom prize created right around the time Donald Trump was expressing frustration over not receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. FIFA President Gianni Infantino actually handed this Golden Winners Trophy directly to Trump at the Kennedy Center draw. Fast forward to August 2025, and that exact trophy was sitting right on the Resolute desk in the Oval Office.
We've even seen Infantino wearing a red USA hat at diplomatic events. The mutual admiration here is heavily documented.
So the crucial point is, does protocol even matter anymore? This unique relationship completely breaks down those traditional boundaries between sports and politics. The normal rules of how a dignitary is supposed to behave at a sporting event, they simply do not apply to this duo. To really understand this, look at a recent viral moment from a stadium in New Jersey, which, by the way, is the very stadium hosting the upcoming World Cup final. Chelsea Football Club won a tournament, and typically, the dignitaries in the suits leave the stage so the winning team can lift the trophy all by themselves. Instead, Donald Trump stayed right in the middle of the stage. Players like Cole Palmer and Reece James looked visibly confused about why a politician was crashing their big celebration. Infantino reportedly tried to persuade Trump to step aside, but failed. Trump was not for budging. He absolutely wanted to be front and center. What we are really witnessing here is two masters of the modern outrage machine working side by side. Unlike past kind of faceless FIFA bureaucrats who preferred to stay in the shadows, Infantino really mirrors Trump. They are both highly clippable, very divisive, and they both know exactly how to weather intense online hate and love to command the global spotlight. They wield immense power, and let me tell you, they aren't afraid to use it publicly. And that leads us into Section 4. Will politics eclipse the pitch? A history of controversy. Let's move to and see how this builds historically, because politics casting a shadow over football is really a historical feature of the World Cup, not a bug. Look at the history here. Back in 1934, Mussolini was all over the tournament in Italy. In 1978, Argentina hosted while being run by a military junta. Jump to 2018, the World Cup was in Russia just years after the invasion of Crimea. And then in 2022, Qatar hosted amidst intense scrutiny over migrant worker deaths and infrastructure controversies. So history clearly shows us that controversy is almost always baked right into the buildup. However, there's this dignitary dilemma that makes 2026 feel very different. In past tournaments, leaders generally stayed out of the players' way when the actual football happened. Even Vladimir Putin in 2018 largely kept to the background during the trophy lift. I mean, he even left the Croatian president out in the pouring rain without an umbrella. But Trump's entire brand is being center stage, with the U.S. hosting during his second term, overlapping with America's 250th birthday, and leading right up to the 2028 Olympics. We can definitely expect a host leader who wants to be actively inserted into the on-pitch events like literally never before. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it shows politics can inject itself entirely by accident. Over in Seattle, local organizers designated one of their matches as the official LGBTQ+ Pride match to coincide with Pride Month in June. But because of the totally random tournament draw, the two teams scheduled to play in that exact match ended up being Iran and Egypt. Two nations with incredibly strict laws and views regarding homosexuality. Egypt has already objected. It's just a supreme geopolitical irony where political friction happens completely regardless of anyone's intentions. Which leaves us with this final overarching thought to chew on. We've got 104 matches, unprecedented logistical scale, serious regional tensions, a president who loves the spotlight, and a FIFA boss happy to share it. So, once that very first whistle blows at the Aztec Stadium, will the sport be able to transcend the noise? Will the world focus on the beautiful game itself? Or will the immense geopolitical chaos hanging over North America prove simply too massive to ignore? Think about that as we get closer to kickoff. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.